Middle stage evolutions are often the most forgettable part of a Pokemon's evolution line. The first stage is iconic, popular in merchandise and generally recognizable. The final stage evolutions are the ones used in the endgame or in competitive play, since they have the highest stats and are the most powerful. Why would anyone care about the middle stage? They're nothing more than a transitional evolution. You don't spend much time with them, and they are quickly forgotten as you progress further in the game. But I think that's a little sad. Why don't we put some spotlight on these forgotten middle children for once? Sometimes these middle stage Pokemon do pop up in competitive play. Most of them are outclassed by their final forms, obviously, but sometimes they aren't, and they actually do stand out in some unique way that gives them some value. Even if they are outclassed, they can still find a place for themselves in lower tiers, and do pretty well there, even among fellow fully evolved Pokemon. Let's take a look at Pokemon's most noteworthy middle stage evolutions in competitive, and which of them is the absolute best. Subscribe to the channel for your own personal gain. Thank you. In Generation 9, there is a noteworthy new middle stage evolution that is worth shouting out. Bisharp is formerly a fully evolved Pokemon, but now King Gambit exists, the final form, so Bisharp is a middle stage evolution. Bisharp is obviously way better than most other middle stage evolutions, although in Gen 9, power creep is quite high, and it is only ranked in the RU tier. Although it's had great success in previous tiers, you can hardly count that because back then, it was a fully evolved Pokemon. If Bisharp had access to knockoff like it did in previous generations, this might be different, but in Generation 9, Bisharp no longer has its former best move. If we take a look back at Pokemon history, one of the most successful middle stage evolutions in the early generations was Kadabra. This is the Pokemon in between Abra and Alakazam, and for a middle stage, it is very impressive. 120 base special attack and 105 base speed is pretty damn good for a middle stage. Its other stats leave something to be desired, but special attack and speed are good enough to work with on their own. In the early generations, these stats are more impressive than those of many fully evolved Pokemon, and Kadabra outranks a significant amount of them. In its debut game of Gen 1, Kadabra is impressively ranked in UU, where it is one of the best Pokemon in the format. This was also true in Generation 2, despite Psychic types being nerfed as of the addition of Dark and Steel types to the game. In Generation 3, Kadabra is ranked in the same tier as Alakazam, UUBL. That's right, Kadabra is too powerful for the UU format in Generation 3. Although Alakazam is obviously directly superior to Kadabra, it doesn't seem like it's by much. In Generation 5, Alakazam is one of the best Pokemon in the game. Alakazam gained the new ability Magic Guard in this generation, which is one of the best abilities in the entire game to this day, granting a complete immunity to all indirect damage. One of the most popular archetypes in Generation 5 is called Psychic Spam, where you use multiple Psychic type Pokemon, usually Alakazam and Reuniclus with this powerful Magic Guard ability, and just try to overwhelm the opponent with too many threats for them to be able to check all of them. If this team could, it would probably just run multiple Alakazams, but you can't do that in competitive Pokemon because there's a species clause, meaning you can't run more than one of the same species of Pokemon on a team. But you can run their pre-evolved forms, so it is actually a viable strategy in Gen 5 to just run Alakazam and Kadabra on these teams. A second, slightly worse Alakazam is really good still. It also has Magic Guard, and it has good enough special attack to pose a threat and overwhelm the enemy, forcing in their Tyranitar and breaking through important checks for the rest of your team to clean up. Gen 5 OU is one of the highest power level formats in history, so a middle stage evolution like Kadabra having a viable role here is really impressive in my opinion. This will be the peak of Kadabra's relevance, as Psychic typing got worse and worse over the years, but I think it has a pretty impressive career and resume for a middle stage evolution. In a similar vein, Haunter also has an illustrious career in the early generations, surprisingly. Haunter is just worse Gengar, but much like Kadabra, worse Gengar is pretty good. It helps that Haunter's special attack and speed are decent enough. 115 is pretty good by early game standards, and 95 speed is usable. The early generations were seriously starved for ghost types. Gengar is the premier ghost type in the first 3 games by a significant margin, and it is ranked OU in these games. So in the lower tiers, Haunter is often the next best thing, and it is basically just Gengar Light. Haunter is ranked UU in generations 1 and 2, which I think is pretty damn impressive. Haunter does lack some of Gengar's best options, unfortunately, but it has most of the good ones. You have Thunderbolt, Explosion, which is very important, Destiny Bond to trade with enemies, Hypnosis to put things to sleep, and you can even use Thief to steal steal enemy items. In Generation 4 UU, Haunter is mostly outclassed by the new Pokemon Mismagius, who kinda takes the position as the Gengar of Gen 4 UU. But Haunter is used sometimes, surprisingly. It has higher special attack than Mismagius, and a poison typing, which comes in handy for poison stab damage and immunity to toxic. And Haunter has access to Explosion, which Mismagius does not. Although it's not the best, I think it is worth shouting out Pikachu, actually. Pikachu is a middle stage evolution since the introduction of Pichu in Generation 2, and since it's the mascot of the series, they did give Pikachu a unique tool to have a leg up over Raichu in some situations, and that is the exclusive Light Ball item, which is a ridiculously powerful item. The Light Ball grants double special attack if held by Pikachu specifically. With a Light Ball equipped and maximum special attack investment, Pikachu can achieve pretty ridiculous levels of damage, even reaching a higher special attack value than legendaries like Kyogre. This is pretty much a gimmick though, as Pikachu is extremely frail and easily worn down by things like hazards and any stray hit really. With only 35 HP and 30 defense, how exactly does Pikachu hit the field to pose a threat in the first place? 90 speed is actually pretty decent, but it is still slow by the standards of most OU Pokemon. Pikachu tends to be ranked in lower tiers, but for a middle stage evolution, this is a pretty funny niche, and a lot of pro players have tried to make it work just for fun, just to see if there is any merit to the idea of a really hard-hitting Pikachu. Usually there isn't, but some have tried. Before the introduction of the Eviolite item, which was a buff to all middle stage evolutions across the board, granting 1.5 times defense and special defense if you are not fully evolved. There were some examples of middle stage evolutions that were actually competitively viable before this item even existed. One of the most noteworthy is Magneton. Magneton is a Pokemon that became a middle stage evolution later in the series. In Generation 4, Magneton received a new evolved form, Magnezone. For the most part, Magnezone completely outclasses Magneton, but Magneton is still sometimes used in Generation 4 OU. Despite being inferior in all of its other stats, Magneton has a slightly higher speed stat of base 70, beating out Magnezone's base 60. Most of the time this doesn't really matter, but Magneton can achieve specific speed benchmarks that make it more useful than Magnezone with a Choice Scarf equipped sometimes. Choice Scarf Magneton will have the benefit of trapping and eliminating the steel types that you want to trap, as it is a formidable Pokemon despite not being fully evolved, with a respectable 120 base special attack. But on top of this, Magneton with a Choice Scarf is able to outrun very important enemies in the metagame that Magnezone can't. Some of these include a +1 speed boosted Adamant Dragonite or Gyarados, which is pretty nice. You can switch in Magneton as they Dragon Dance and then offensively check them, outrunning and eliminating them from there. Magneton can outrun Starmie with a Choice Scarf equipped. Starmie is a very common Pokemon, and being able to outrun and threaten it directly with a Thunderbolt is pretty massive. And Magneton is able to outrun Choice Scarf Tyranitar, which is a popular set. Funnily enough, Tyranitar has a base speed stat of 61, just 1 point higher than Magnezone's base 60. So Magnezone is just shy of hitting this speed benchmark, but Magneton does hit it. It's pretty funny how 10 speed can make such a difference in these old metagames that are very refined, but being able to do all of these things does make Magneton a bit better than Magnezone on specific teams where you want these interactions. Another middle stage evolution that had some real value before the addition of Eviolite was Porygon 2. Porygon 2 received a new evolution in Gen 4 as well, Porygon Z, who is actually a pretty different Pokemon to Porygon 2. Porygon 2 was mostly used as a defensive wall, but Porygon Z is very offensive in nature. Porygon Z has the abilities Download and Adaptability to enhance its damage output and a higher speed stat as well. This is a rare case of an evolved form not being strictly better. Porygon 2 does have higher defense and special defense stats, which is noteworthy, and it has a unique ability of its own, the ability Trace. Trace has the effect of copying the enemy's ability on switch in, which has a lot of useful applications. Porygon 2 can switch in against Gyarados and copy their Intimidate, lowering the enemy's attack on switch in. This makes Porygon 2 one of the best Gyarados checks in the entire game, which is really important actually, as Gyarados is one of the scariest threats in OU back in Gen 4. Porygon 2 can also copy Flash Fire from Heatran, gaining fire immunity and making it very safe to switch in against Heatran. You can also copy Levitate from Flygon, Volt Absorb from the the occasional Jolteon and other useful applications too, like copying Magic Guard from Clefable. So even before Eviolite, Porygon 2 had some real merit over its evolved form, and when Eviolite was introduced, Porygon 2, of course, got even better at this, with even more impressive defensive stats now available to it. To this day, Porygon 2 sees occasional use on doubles teams, as Eviolite is a convenient item to put on it, not expending your item clause from other teammates, and it's a great trick room setter with a good move pool that is pretty easy to build around. As far as middle evolutions go, Porygon 2 is absolutely one of the most impressive in the entire series, and my personal favorite middle evolution in the series. But there is a clear answer for best middle stage evolution in Pokemon, and I think that would have to be Chansey. Chansey was not always a middle stage evolution. In Generation 1, it was just a fully evolved Pokemon, and it was one of the best Pokemon in the game back then. In Generation 2, Chansey received the new evolution of Blissey, but to be honest, this is one of the cases where the evolved form is not that much better than the pre-evolved form. Blissey does have superior stats, but not by that much. Chansey still has that fantastic HP stat of 250 and a usable enough special defense stat to function. Gen 4 is when Chansey would become a middle stage evolution, as Happiny was added to the game, a new first stage for the Chansey and Blissey line. In Generation 4, Chansey is just ranked in UU, which is a testament to its inherent strength. And in Generation 5, Chansey would become the poster child of the new Eviolite item, and its most premier abuser throughout history. Chansey with an Eviolite is fantastic, and access to the Eviolite gives it a real benefit over its evolved form Blissey, allowing it to achieve much better defensive stats. Chansey has a UUBL ranking in Generation 5, too powerful for the UU tier, and it is straight up ranked in OU in Generations 6 and 7, which for a middle stage evolution is very impressive in my opinion. Chansey even has value up in the Ubers tier among Pokemon's most powerful legendaries. Blissey does too, but Chansey of course sets itself apart with superior defensive stats, and that comes into play way more often among legendaries with some of the highest damage output in the game. Chansey is one of the few things that can withstand the onslaught of enemies like Choice Scarf, Kyogre, and Geomancy boosted Xerneas and things like this. I would definitely say that the most successful and best middle stage evolution in Pokemon is Chansey without a doubt. But what do you think, folks? Who is your favorite middle stage evolution? Are there any noteworthy ones that I missed? And what would you like me to talk about next? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.